We've seen some things, but let's now go back to this server that's got the synthetic load. And let's say you happen to be looking at your server and you see, oh my goodness, look, I've got a long-running request. Why is that request taking so long? Well, if you go to Requests, Activity, that shows any currently running request. Now, as soon as I opened it, there was a request that was taking 200 milliseconds and one taking 45 seconds. Let me refresh the page, and I'll bet the one that took 200 will be gone. And it is, and there's the one that was taking 60 seconds. Now, I know this thing refreshes every 60 seconds, so I'm going to refresh it and it's going to be gone. But it's going to start up again. So it's already 9 seconds into its next iteration. So the point is, this is a long-running request. And FusionReactor is saying, when I came into this display, there were these two requests running. I might have had a bunch of other requests that did run, but these two were running. Now, before I dig into this, I want to repeat that point. Look, I'm getting 3 requests per second. I only see 2 of them here. There's a lot of requests running that I'm not seeing. If I look at the requests history, that shows me what requests did run. So on the server, wherever the server is, it's 1742. And here, just in the past several seconds, there have been like 10 requests. So don't think just because you don't see anything in the request activity that nothing's going on your server. There's a lot of requests running all the time. But when you go to requests activity, you want to focus on if there's any that's there that's taken a long time. And again, I caught it right at 59 seconds. I'll refresh it, and it'll be a few seconds into its life. So again, there's this automatically rerunning request, in this case of the synthetic load. But yours might be a real long-running request from a real user. And the point is, what do you want to do about it? Well, I've shown you could look at the details. So on any request, you can click on it and see this kind of stuff. You can see the IP address. You can see if queries have been run already. If there's a currently running query, that wouldn't be there. But if we go to this JDBC tab, that shows what queries have run, what are running. Here's running queries. Here's completed queries. So this particular request had already done a select statement of these 2 columns from this table, and it took this long to run and brought back this many records. It happened also to be running this query, and it has been taking 19 seconds at the time I clicked on this. If I refresh the page, I might catch it still running. It's probably finished. Oh, right at 59 seconds. So if I go to the JDBC tab, we caught it right at the last second, and there was that thing. Now, you look at the SQL statement and go, I don't get that. Well, this isn't a legitimate one that you would do. This is, again, a synthetic load, and they've put in a SQL Server specific select statement that says, go to sleep for a minute. So the database got the query, went to sleep. ColdFusion's waiting for that database. But you might do your own SQL statement that queries a bunch of tables or queries one table and has a bad index, or whatever, something's wrong, and the query takes a long time. Well, you could see by coming into FusionReactor that query took a long time. And that could be helpful for you to go figure out, why is that query taking a long time. So I'm going to back up because I know this request is already finished. There's no point in looking at it anymore. I'm going to refresh the page and see how long it's into its life. 56 seconds. I'll let it go ahead and finish, and I'm going to do one more thing. Let's say you have a long-running request and you don't see it running a query, and therefore you don't know why it's taking a long time. You wonder, why is it taking a long time? Well, here's another really powerful feature of FusionReactor that many people who've used it for months or years don't know that exists. On this request, rather than dig into it to see if it's running a particular query, I can do what's called a stack trace, this little button here. I can click on that button, and that says to the JVM and to FusionReactor, hey, ask JVM to ask ColdFusion to ask that request, what are you doing? Right now, what line of code are you on? And now these stack traces, when you first see them, they look like gibberish, and you may not know what to make of them, but it doesn't take long to figure them out. I can tell, because I use these all the time, that this is running this line of code. This stack trace is telling us that that line of code was running at the moment I said, what are you doing? Here's what he was doing. Now, the reason I know that's what the line was is if you start at the top and work your way down, that's the first thing that refers to a CFM or a CFC. So at the moment this CF page was running, it was on line 25 of frjdbc2.cfm. Isn't that amazing? If you've never seen that, if you have a long-running request and you're wondering why is that taking so long, you just stack trace it. And with a little bit of experience, you learn how to go, oh, it's line 25 of frjdbc2.cfm. Let's go look into that. Here's the full path to the code. And of course, your path may be different. You may be on Linux. You may have your code in inet pub www, whatever, it doesn't matter. Wherever it is, if it's in a custom tags directory, if it's in a mapping, doesn't matter. Wherever it is, you're going to see in FusionReactor the real path to the file. And if you're on the server, you could just highlight that file and path, copy to the clipboard, open up the file, do an edit go to line 25, and boom, there's whatever the line of code was, it was running. Now you also can learn eventually you don't even need to look at the code. You have everything you need right here to know what that line 25 was doing. And if we were in a group where I could talk to you, I'd ask if anybody knew. But let me just tell you, once you find the line of code that it's running, again, you read stack traces from the top down. So once we find this line 25, well, what that turned into was this line above it, line 533. But that's not important. Here's what's important. It's a ColdFusion tag query tag.doEnd tag. Right, that means that's a closing CF query tag. Line 25 is a closing CF query tag. Now you might think that means, oh, it's moving on to the next line of code. No, it means do the query. And in fact, that turned into this Java method that said query tag, execute the query. And that turned into, hey, SQL implementation, execute the query. And that turned into, hey, executive, execute the query. And that ultimately led to, hey, SQL server, go execute the query. And then it did whatever it did to ultimately be waiting for the database to provide its response. So in the moment we said, what are you doing? He was running line 25, and line 25 had turned into these various Java things, and this is what it was doing at the moment. The top one was waiting for the database to give it a response. And when it gave it a response, it would go to this read method, and when it finished, it would go to this method and back down to this. And if it was done with the query, it would move on to the next line of code. Now, we don't see here what the next line of code is. We only see at the moment, what's he doing? That's the line of code he was running. And that's it. And if there was like a call to an application CFM or CFC, we might see that later on down here too, because the application CFM or CFC then called the CF page, and the CF page eventually ran this line of code, and this is what it's doing from that point up. Now, when you do the stack trace like this, you're just seeing a point in time. At that moment, it's saying that's what it did. And with a little bit of experience, you can pretty much figure this out in about 5 seconds and go, okay, that's what that request is doing. Well, once you found that out, you don't really want to stop there, because you don't know how long it's been doing that, and you don't know that it's been doing it for a long time. You just know that at the moment you said, hey, what are you doing? He said, I'm on line 25. To know if he's really been on that line for a long time, we have to refresh the stack trace. Now, if I just refresh the page, we're going to see it give us an error message or a message that says, hey, that request doesn't live anymore. It was running, but it's not running anymore. And you can't stack trace a request that isn't running. It doesn't make any sense. So let's go back instead to the list of running requests. I'm going to refresh it. Let's see how many seconds into its life it is. 36 seconds. I'm going to do the stack trace. I got about 24 seconds to figure this out before I know it's going to end. So there it is on line FRJDBC to line 25. And I'm going to refresh this. And it's not yet finished. So there was no message at the top. And it's still sitting on line 25 of FRJDBC2. So then I could say, I got a smoking gun. That request was there, and then 10 seconds later when I refreshed it, it's still there. There's our problem. Let's go figure out what that's about. And sometimes when you've got long-running requests displayed in that interface and you wonder what they're doing, this will tell you that's what it's doing. And then you go figure it out. What's the problem? What tag is it? Maybe you'll find it's a CF HTTP tag. Maybe it's calling some third-party server, and the CF page is stuck on the CF HTTP waiting for a response. It's not getting it. Well, that thread, that CF request, is now basically out of commission until it gets its response. Well, let's say that happens in not only this request, but another request and another request. Maybe it's a big part of your application. Well, it could be that eventually this page is full of requests that are taking hundreds of seconds, and when you stack trace them, they're all doing CF HTTPs. Well, there's your problem. Go figure out why that third-party server is not responding. There's your problem, not ColdFusion. ColdFusion's the victim. And I don't have an example here right now, but on my website, I do believe, let me just do a quick, create a test page. I want to demonstrate that and show you something in particular. So I know you can't see my screen right now. That's okay. I'm going to kick off a long-running HTTP request. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my server, arehart.org, and we're going to see that now all of a sudden, where everything had been cool and copacetic and nothing ever running very long, suddenly I got a long-running request. And it's one or two requests that are running, taking a long time, going up, 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 and they're going to last for 60 seconds. Now, if I go to my requests activity, I'll see there's a invoke CF-HTTP. So I'm going to click on that page, and it is doing a CF-HTTP. And if I do the stack trace, we'll see that it says it's doing line 12 of invoke a CF-HTTP that waits, and it's calling HTTP tag do end tag. All right, so this request is doing a CF-HTTP. And if I refreshed it and it was still doing that for a long time, there would be my answer to my question. But I want to show you something else FusionReactor can tell you. If I click on this and go to relations, here I can see the CF-HTTP taking 55 seconds also. So FusionReactor not only tracks database calls, but it also tracks HTTP calls. So I don't even have to stack trace it to see that it's stuck doing a CF-HTTP. That's a cool thing about FusionReactor. And I can see here the URL that was called. So let's be clear. This is the page that did the CF-HTTP. This is where that CF-HTTP called to. And in your environment, that might be some third-party server, like a payment gateway or something like that, weather service, who knows. But you'd have the URL here and how long it took. And you could take that information and say, run it yourself and say, hey, yeah, when I run it, it also goes slow. Well, no wonder ColdFusion's slow. It's waiting for that to finish. So that's a cool feature of FusionReactor, to be able to see the HTTP processing. All right, let's try to wrap up FusionReactor real quick in the remaining several minutes, and then we'll move on to Fusion Analytics. And by the way, Daniel, go ahead and chime in. Do you guys typically take a break at 8 for a few minutes and then come back? Keep on rolling. No, I'm cool. Okay, cool. Thank you, sir. All right, so we were looking at metrics, web metrics, and that's pretty much all we need to see of that, and looking at running a request. Hope you find that valuable. In fact, let me just go ahead and stop since we're taking a little moment. Anybody have any questions or comments on what we've seen so far? Okay. So that's really valuable to be able to see what's going on in the moment. Why is a request taking a long time? Go ahead. Okay. Okay, man. So I'm going to go back to my server, which has more realistic load on it. Let me show you that there's also requests. Now, some people find this on their own, longest request. This is the longest request that have run on my CF server since it came up, which in my case was 40 days ago, but in your case it might be hours or days ago. And so this is in sorted duration order. What were the longest running requests? These are milliseconds, so these are thousands of seconds, and that's certainly dismaying to see that there's some requests taking thousands of seconds. And I might want to explore them. If I click on this URL, I can see there was 39 queries. They took a total of 3 seconds, so that doesn't explain 2,000 seconds. So whatever my problem was, it wasn't query processing. I can look at the relations and see if there's any CF-HTTP in there, or if anything is long. I'll just look down the list on the right. Nope, I don't see anything. So, and this would show the top 30 slowest things. So I didn't have that. So sometimes you can't tell by looking at this what it is. Now here's an example where if I wanted to, if this was happening at a time when a lot of requests were going slow, I could have told FusionReactor to watch for when a bunch of requests are running slow and send me an email. I mentioned this earlier. I could have been sent an email that said, hey, back at this time, here were these requests running slow. And in the email, it would say, here's the URLs, here's the IP address, and it would have in it what's called the stack traces, the thread dump, which is all the stack traces of all the threads. And it's a pretty big email, a couple thousand lines, but the point is I could look at it and do the same thing I just did. I could say, well, find me a request that was running long, let me get its thread ID, find its stack trace in the email, and there it would be, just like the stack trace we were just looking at. And I would say, oh, That's why that request was taking a long time. So we can't tell by here looking at it, but we can tell if we had an alert set up. So that's the value of the alerts. So anyway, this was the longest requests. But I wanted to stress that while that seems to be what some people focus on, and maybe you'll find some common running, long running requests to fix, maybe more valuable is to look at slow requests. Slow requests. So the difference is, longest request is the 100 longest requests since CF came up. Slow requests is the 100 most recent requests that were slow. All right, so it focuses on what was slow recently. And so I know on my server right now it's about 1956, and I just had that HTTP that was slow, and it called this page, which was slow. And then before that, about 4 hours earlier, I had this page that was slow. And before that, seconds earlier, 2 seconds earlier, so there might be some interesting connection between those. And then before that, hours before, and then I actually start going back into days ago. And in fact, I can say by looking at this screen that I've only had about 10 slow pages in the past 2 days, and I would feel pretty good about that. And isn't that helpful? I want you to appreciate that. Don't focus on the graphs and the charts only. Sometimes you could look at this list and say to somebody, hey, our server has only had like 10 slow requests in the past 2 days. 10, and then how many have been run. You could look at that interface and figure it out. Or let me just tell you, every request gets an ID, and this is the request ID. So if I look back to the, we'll say the 16th or the 15th, the last request on the 15th was 550375, and this most recent one was 590805, so 5502, that's 40,000 requests. I've had 40,000 requests since the 16th, of which about 8 were slow. I would say I'm doing pretty good. 8 slow requests out of 40,000. Okay, so slow in FusionReactor is by default 8 seconds. So if a request is 8 seconds or slower, it shows up in this list. So that's more valuable, I think, sometimes than looking at the longest running requests. Look at what's been slow recently and see if there isn't anything to be gained from that. And I might find, for instance, if I look at this IP address, that kind of looks like a spider. Let's see. I'll go to headers. And the user agent is Yahoo Slurp. So, sometimes these slow requests, they're not even real people. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't focus on them, but don't go freaking out that all your users are getting slow requests, because you might find out no, it's spiders and bots, and they have their own reasons why sometimes they can have slow requests. We don't have time to get into that now, but just keep that in mind. Sometimes you might find that when you look in here. Okay, so that was requests, slow requests. And there's lots more we could cover, but let me skip down and show some more things. I talked earlier about how if the memory was high and you did a GC and it didn't drop much, something's holding on to memory. Well, if we could talk, I would ask you, what might hold on to memory beyond the life of a request? Somebody might guess it. A common thing is sessions. So you might have lots of sessions. Some people don't know how many sessions they have. Well, FusionReactor can tell you under metrics, custom series. Here's how many sessions I have right now, 200. 200 is not bad. I've worked with people that had 2,000, 20,000, 100,000, and more. And you might go, holy smokes, why would you have 100,000 sessions? And especially if they thought they only had like 100. That's a problem. So that's another subject for another day. How do you have 200,000 sessions? It can happen. But the point is FusionReactor can tell you. And we can look at it over time and see if there's any pattern. And sure enough, somehow in the past 20 minutes, there's been a rise in sessions. I suspect some spider is crawling through my site. Let's see if that has kind of a periodic nature. It's pretty unusual. This is a day, and it's like all kinds of different stuff. And let's look at a week. But you might find things to look very different. Some people, I see their servers go up and down in nice, wavy, one-day patterns. Mine is very varied, and I suspect that's just lots of different spiders hitting my site all the time. And spiders tend to create a new session on every page request. Again, we don't have time to get into that, but that can sometimes happen. So great stuff. Let me just show you too the JDBC. I can see any currently running queries. I can see any recently run queries. These are the 100 most recently run queries, all the queries that have happened on my server. I can see what have been the longest running queries, what have been the most recent slow queries. So here again, we're looking back all the way to November 11th. So, I mean, I have 8 days worth of requests, of which, about 15, have been slow of a few seconds, none more than a few seconds, I feel pretty good about that. And if I look at these numbers, it looks like I've done about 3 million queries in those 3 days. So I'd feel good about those numbers. So that's good stuff. There's much more we could cover. I don't have time, but I want to talk quickly about setting up crash protection. So if